You need a plastic photo ID to get an endless pasta pass at Olive Garden. But you guys actually have the nerve to call voter ID an attack on democracy? The sharp slam of a fist echoed, shattering the thick, calculating silence and the cold neon glow of the Senate committee room at midnight. This was an untouchable fortress of power in Washington, where the architects of the establishment fully expected the will of millions of American voters to be suffocated under mountains of paperwork and pure arrogance. Standing on one side of the battlefield was Character A, representing the MAGA movement, sharp, relentless, armed with practical, everyday common sense and the unquenchable fury of the working class. Directly across from him, slouched comfortably in an expensive leather chair with a contemptuous smirk, was Character B, the living embodiment of the rigid Senate establishment, a man guarding the hidden levers of power while holding grassroots voices in total disdain. Without a single polite greeting, without an ounce of restraint, the war between two entirely different worlds exploded from the very first second, delivering a direct strike against the blatant hypocrisy of the system. Cornered by an argument rooted in undeniable reality, Character B didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled, leisurely adjusting his collar and firing back a freezing splash of water. You seriously think a joke about a restaurant pasta deal applies to federal constitutional law? We don't have time for your street corner theater. The notorious Save America Act you're crying about is going to die right here in this room, just like every other bill designed to give lawmakers a headache. That arrogance didn't stall Character A. If anything, it poured gasoline on his burning anger as he stared right through the facade of this so-called supreme legislative body. Die? Oh, you guys are good. The Senate nowadays is nothing more than a graveyard, a cemetery built exclusively to bury whatever the American people actually crave and demand. Character B just shrugged, acting entirely unfazed by public outrage, as if history had never once recorded a massive uprising of betrayed voters. But before we dissect who is actually pulling the strings behind the fate of America on that dark night, let's rewind the tape just a bit and look at how this storm actually brewed. Remember the electric energy of former President Donald Trump standing before a roaring sea of humanity in Marietta, Georgia, effortlessly cracking classic jokes while driving home the most fundamental truths about patriotism. That was the exact moment an 80-year-old president moved with the raw, unstoppable energy of a warrior poet, calling out the rotting cancer eating away at the country and showing everyday citizens that they had nothing left to lose against a system infected by the left's invisible contagion. Character A leans forward, his eyes locked on to the arrogant bureaucrat across the desk, refusing to let the deflection slide. Don't change the subject and don't hide behind procedural delays. Because the American people see right through the game you're playing with the Save America Act. You want to talk about obstruction? Let's talk about the man holding the keys to the Senate chamber, John Thune. While Speaker Johnson and the House did their part passing critical election integrity provisions, the Senate has become a graveyard where common sense legislation goes to die. You and your establishment cronies are deliberately choking off basic safeguards like mandatory photo ID, proof of citizenship, and banning mail-in ballots that are as crooked as hell. Character B sneers, crossing his arms and leaning back into his leather chair with an air of untouchable condescension. Oh, spare me the populist melodrama about election integrity. What you call safeguards, we call barriers designed to suppress voters and restrict access to the ballot box. We are expanding democratic access, making sure everyone can vote without jumping through bureaucratic hoops. And if your little movement keeps pushing this reckless crusade to bypass the filibuster and jam these bills through, let me give you a little reality check about what happens next September. We won't approve your funding frameworks. We will force a total government shutdown and will trigger a debt ceiling crisis that I like to call the 1929 disaster all over again. Let's see how much your base loves Donald Trump when the entire American economy grinds to a grinding halt because you refuse to compromise. Character A slams his hand down on the table, his voice cutting through the threat like a razor-sharp blade. That right there is the true face of the Washington swamp, holding the entire American population hostage with economic terrorism just to protect a broken, corrupt voting system. You threaten a shutdown because you know that transparent elections mean the end of your unearned power. Trump was entirely right to call out your obstruction and tell the American people to flood John Thune's office with calls demanding action. Over 85% of Americans across party lines agree that only U.S. citizens should vote in our elections and that a simple photo ID is common sense. yet you fight tooth and nail against it because cheating is the only way your side stays relevant. Character B rolls his eyes, letting out an exaggerated sigh of manufactured exhaustion. You people are obsessed with conspiracy theories about stolen elections. It's always the same old panic rhetoric designed to whip up your base into an emotional frenzy. Speaking of emotional frenzies, let's talk about the theatrical stunts your side pulls at every single rally. Dragging families of fallen soldiers onto the stage, replaying assassination survival stories like it's a Hollywood action movie, it's pure emotional manipulation. Character A's expression hardens instantly, his gaze turning ice cold at the insult. Don't you ever dare speak about those moments with such utter contempt. That wasn't theater. That was raw, bleeding reality. Think back to that electric, roaring crowd in Marietta, Georgia, where President Trump stepped up after taking a literal bullet for this country, standing tall, pumping his fist with a steely resolve the world will never forget. Think about the profound silence that fell over tens of thousands of everyday Americans when he honored the family of fallen First Lieutenant Tyler J. Fiend, pointing silently to heaven while carrying their memory in his heart forever. That is what empathy looks like. That is what a true leader looks like. Someone who bleeds for his people, who shares the genuine heartbreak and deflation we all feel under your tyrannical thumb. Meanwhile, what do you and your liberal media masters offer? Pure, unadulterated coldness, mocking the very sacrifices that keep this nation free. Character B shifts uncomfortably for a fraction of a second before hiding behind a cynical smirk. Sentimentality doesn't write federal legislation, my friend. Emotions don't balance budgets. No matter how many emotional stories you tell about fallen soldiers or how many times your leader pumps his fist, the structural reality of American governance remains untouched. Character A leans in closer, lowering his voice into a sharp, piercing hiss that strips away all pretense. You call it structural reality. The rest of America calls it a slow-motion execution of our republic. Because while you sit here playing procedural games, your side is actively embracing a full-blown radical ideology that is destroying our children's future. Communism packaged under a modern brand name. You aren't social democrats. You are stone-cold totalitarians acting as the enemies of free people everywhere. Character B scoffs, throwing his hands up in mock disbelief. Oh, please. Communism? Are we back in the McCarthy era? What's next? A red scare under every bed. You're throwing around Cold War buzzwords just because society's evolving and progressing toward inclusivity. Character A fires back without missing a beat, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. Inclusivity? Is that what you call destroying women's sports by forcing biological men onto the podium? Is that what you call the radical transgender mutilation of children, pushing chemical and surgical procedures behind parents' backs? Is that what you call flooding blue states and open borders with illegal aliens who are caught casting thousands of illegal votes like those uncovered in New Jersey? You voted against no tax on overtime. You voted against no tax on Social Security for our seniors. And you voted against lower energy and car prices. You voted against every single thing that puts food on an American worker's table, all while welcoming the Marxist agenda to bankrupt families and leave our borders wide open. As Trump warned at Mount Rushmore before your radical mobs even tried to tear it down, this invisible contagion has slinked into the arteries, edifices, and cracks of our society to wreak boundless havoc. It is the single greatest threat in our nation's history, surpassing World War I, World War II, Pearl Harbor, and 9/11 combined. Character B's smug expression finally cracks, a flicker of genuine irritation flashing across his face as he sits up straight. You're painting a dystopian cartoon because you're terrified of demographic and cultural shifts you can't stop. Progress can't be halted by angry speeches or nostalgic whining about the good old days. The future belongs to a diverse, interconnected coalition, and no amount of grassroots resistance or Senate pressure is going to turn back the clock. Character A smiles grimly, recognizing that the mask of invincibility is starting to slip. Interconnected coalition? You mean a desperate grab for absolute uncheck-ended power? You think you're safe behind your blue state strongholds and your threats of shutting down the government? You think you can terminate the filibuster the second you get full control, admit Puerto Rico and D.C. as states to lock in 12 new congressmen and 40 extra electoral votes and permanently rig the Electoral College? You think you can turn America into a one-party permanent ruling class But you forgot one tiny fatal detail in your grand master plan. The American people have woken up and they brought back up. Character B narrows his eyes, a sudden edge of unease creeping into his tone. Backup? What backup? It's just a bunch of internet commentators and aging voters shouting into the void. Character A's eyes flash with fierce vindication as he drops the ultimate trump card into the conversation. Oh, really? What happens when the greatest warrior poet and patriot this country has ever seen, a man who took a bullet and stood back up, is joined by the wealthiest, most brilliant immigrant entrepreneur on the planet? Elon Musk stepping up to back the MAGA movement isn't just a political alliance. It is your worst absolute nightmare. He is an immigrant who actually loves America, stepping outside the darling bubble of the left, exposing your corruption, and stripping away your institutional control piece by piece. You tried to smear him, you tried to bankrupt Trump, you tried to imprison him, and you even tried to assassinate him multiple times. Yet here they stand completely undeterred, fueled by a steely resolve that makes your entire apparatus look like a house of cards built on quicksand. Character B stammers slightly, losing his smooth composure for the first time, his fingers twitching nervously on the armrest. Musk. Musk is just an eccentric billionaire playing politics. He can't dismantle the entire federal apparatus. Character A leans forward, his voice a low, thunderous warning that echoes off the marble walls. Can he? Look at the millions of Americans tuning in right now, calling their senators, sharing the truth, and spreading common sense like wildfire. Your demonic possession of this country's institutions is coming to an end. The firewall is breaking, the swamp is being exposed, and no amount of threats or midnight procedural blocks will save you when the full force of a awakened American public comes crashing through your doors. Character B's face drains of color, his jaw slackening as the terrifying realization finally sets in that his once omnipotent institutional shield has completely shattered. He stammers, looking desperately around the empty, neon-lit room, as if searching for an escape hatch that no longer exists. You really think a few phone calls and viral videos are going to dismantle decades of established federal governance? Character A stands up slowly, towering over the broken bureaucrat with an expression of absolute, unyielding triumph. Decades of corruption, you mean? And yes, when those phone calls turn into a tidal wave, when millions of American patriots refuse to back down, your little ivory tower doesn't stand a chance. You thought you could hide behind procedural walls, behind midnight threats of government shutdowns, and behind your fake media narratives. Instead, you've awakened a sleeping giant that is about to sweep away every single architect of this administrative nightmare. Character B sinks back into his chair, utterly defeated, completely stripped of his arrogant veneer, whispering in helpless disbelief. We never anticipated the pushback would be this relentless, because you live in a bubble of complete moral blindness, completely disconnected from the heartbeat of the real America. Think about what Charlie Kirk poured his entire life into building a relentless grassroots army dedicated to putting America first, ensuring that a third of his too short life became the bedrock of this modern patriotic renaissance. God rest his soul, but Charlie's mission is marching forward stronger than ever, echoing through every corner of this country. Think about Donald Trump refusing to stay down after taking a literal bullet for us, standing back up, pumping his fist, and proving to the world that this nation's spirit cannot be assassinated, cannot be imprisoned, and cannot be bought. You can throw all your invisible contagions at us, your modern communistic subversions, your DEI fractures, and your institutional rot. They are nothing more than weak germs trying to infect a body composed of pure, unbreakable American steel. Character B looks down at his hands, trembling slightly as the structural reality of his defeat crashes down upon him. So what happens now? What happens to the Senate, to the establishment, to all of us? Character A leans down, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp, chilling verdict. Now, the reckoning arrives. The question isn't whether your precious Senate firewall is going to collapse under the pressure of millions of angry citizens demanding action against John Thune and his cronies. The question is whether you'll have the political sense to step out of the way before the avalanche buries you completely. Character A turns his back on the broken symbol of establishment power, walking toward the heavy mahogany doors of the committee room with firm, purposeful strides. He pauses just before opening the door, turning back one last time to look directly into the camera, right at every single patriot watching across the nation. This is our home, this is our republic, and nobody, no corrupt senator, no radical leftist mob, and no deep state bureaucrat is ever going to take it away from us. Our mission right now is simple. Take action, make your voices heard, tap that thumbs up, leave a comment with an American flag emoji, and share this truth everywhere it needs to go. Spread common sense, make it go viral, and let every coward in Washington know that America is sick and tired of their garbage. We are with our president, we are brothers in arms, and we will never surrender. God bless you all. God bless the United States of America and all who bravely defend her. I'll see you soon. Character B grips the edges of the mahogany desk, his knuckles turning white as a desperate, pathetic wave of defiance surges through him one last time. You think a simple grassroots wave and a couple of viral clips are going to permanently alter the balance of power in Washington? The establishment has survived scandals, civil wars, and economic depressions for centuries, and we will outlast you and your populist movement. Character A pauses at the threshold of the door, turning his head back just slightly with a cold, knowing smile playing on his lips. You call it survival. History calls it extinction. You survived because you operated in the shadows, hidden behind polite handshakes and boring bureaucratic jargon that made people's eyes glaze over. The moment Donald Trump pulled back the curtain and exposed the rot festering beneath the floorboards of the Capitol, your shadow vanished. You aren't fighting a political party anymore. You're fighting an awakening. Character B scrambles to his feet, his voice cracking with a sudden, frantic desperation that strips away every ounce of his previous authority. What do you want from us? What will it take to make you people back down? Do you want committee seats? Do you want policy concessions? Name your price. Character A steps back into the room, his presence filling the space with an overwhelming aura of uncompromising strength. We don't want your seats, and we certainly don't want your corrupt concessions. We want our country back. We want a government that fears the people instead of treating the people like an inconvenience to be managed from an ivory tower. We want borders that actually secure our sovereignty instead of turning our nation into a global toll booth. We want elections that reflect the true, unadulterated will of American citizens, protected by strict voter ID laws, free from the stain of ballot harvesting, and transparent down to the very last paper ballot. Character B slumps back against the wall, sliding downward until he is nearly half sitting on the edge of the chair, completely broken. It's impossible. You can't overturn 40 years of globalist policy overnight. Watch us, because while you were busy writing your fancy policy briefs and planning how to bankrupt the American worker with your carbon taxes and inflation bills, millions of everyday patriots were waking up. They're working 2 jobs, watching their grocery bills double, watching biological males shatter records in women's sports, and watching open borders flood their local communities with crime. And they finally realized a fundamental truth. You aren't incompetent. You are malicious. Character B closes his eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath as the final pillars of his worldview collapse inward. We just wanted a stable, managed transition of power, a global order where things ran smoothly without populist disruptions. Managed power? You mean managed decline? You managed our industries straight into the hands of our foreign adversaries. You managed our borders straight into a national security catastrophe. You managed our culture straight into a moral sewer where basic biological reality is treated like hate speech. That isn't governance. That is national suicide wrapped in a nice flag of diplomatic corporate jargon. Character A walks back over to the desk, leaning down so his face is just inches from the trembling bureaucrat. And the American people are finished playing executioner for your suicide cult. Every single time you try to shut down the government to protect your corrupt voting loopholes, every single time you weaponize the Department of Justice against political opponents, you only drive the spike deeper into your own coffin. You thought jailing Trump would crush the movement? It made him a martyr of freedom. You thought assassinating his character or threatening his life would silence him? It forged him into a literal symbol of American immortality. And now, with innovators like Elon Musk stripping away the federal censorship apparatus and exposing your digital tyranny on a global stage, you have nowhere left to hide. Character B opens his eyes, staring blankly at the polished wood of the desk, whispering like a man reciting his own last rites. It's over, isn't it? Character A stands up straight, buttoning his jacket with an air of absolute finality. It's not just over, it never stood a chance against the sheer, undeniable force of American common sense. So here is my final piece of advice to you, and every single coward hiding behind the filibuster in this pathetic excuse for a legislative body. Pick up the phone, call John Thune, tell him to pass the Save America Act, approve the budget, terminate the filibuster, and give the American people what they voted for. Because if you don't, character A pauses, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the room carry the full weight of the warning. The avalanche is coming, and when it hits Washington, not even your deep state bunkers will be deep enough to save you. Character A turns around sharply, pushes open the heavy mahogany doors, and steps out into the brilliant dawn of a new political era, leaving the architects of the swamp shivering in the dark.